Hi again. Here we are to continue with our quiz project and learning about JavaScript and objects. We need to tackle like a tougher problem now, okay? So far we've got our quiz working, but one of the problems here is that, the questions are always in the same order, okay? We've got the submit working where we can tell whether you've submitted an answer or not, and we can tell which which radio button you selected when you did submit, right? And so that's pretty good, right? So here you can see I got null, so I didn't select anything. If I click on this one and submit, then it tells me that this is the radio button, and the answer correct is false because I picked the wrong one. But what we'd like to do is we'd like to randomize these guys, okay? Now, there's a few ways we could do that. We could modify the HTML and change the order that these list items are listed, right? But actually, what's kind of a cool feature that we can use is the CSS has a property called order, and it determines the order that elements are listed in a flex element, right, or a flex container. So all of our list items are going to be inside this UL here. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to declare this UL as a flex container, and then we can give each of the LI tags an order property to say what order it should be in, and then we can make the order random, right? So let's give it a try, right? Now, a lot of this could go in your style sheet, but what I think I'll do here is I'll just generate the styles in line. So remember, if you include a style attribute with a tag like this, then you can just write your CSS styles here, and they'll be applied to this element. So for the UL here, what I want to do is I want to say you're going to be display colon flex. Okay, now that's going to make it display as a row. So by default, everything will run across horizontally. So if I do this, my quiz is going to look a little weird, right? Like everything runs along horizontally, right? So what I want to do, and I'll need a semicolon here, right? What I'll want to do is I want to say flex direction is column, right? And now my list is back into kind of a vertical arrangement, right? And we could put more styles in here, but I think this is all we need for now, right? Okay, and then what we'll do is the list items here, we'll randomize them by giving them a style, right? So in the list item here, I'll say style, and then I'll say equals, quotation marks, and then inside here, I'm going to give each one of these an order property. So the order, though, will have to be random. So I'll have to put a value in there, right? So each one has a different order. The low order will be on top, and then the higher numbers will be below. And there's a couple ways we could handle that, right? Like we could just use a large random number, right? So if we used random numbers and they were between like 1 and 1,000, well, these would probably be in a different order every time, and we wouldn't have two numbers that clashed. And if they did clash, then the original order would take over. So there's like a slight, very small, what would be like 1,000 to 1 probability that the first one or the preceding one would appear before the next, right? But that's one way to do it, and that would probably be easiest. We could just put the number in there and be done. But let's tackle that in a more like kind of like structured way. But this will require that we write some code, okay? And writing code is fun, right? So we're going to obviously choose the code writing way. I'm going to scroll to the bottom, and I'm going to go here below init, and I'm going to add a new function. So I'm going to make a function down here called random. And what I want to do with the random function is generate a random number. So random will take the number n and then return a number between 0 and n minus 1. Okay? So if I gave it the number 6, then it would return to me a random number between 0 and 5, right? And if n was 10, then it would random would return a number between 0 and 9. Okay, so before we can actually do that, let's do one more thing, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to call the Math.random function. So in JavaScript gives us this math object, and the math object has a lot of properties in it. And remember earlier when I talked about the quiz object, right, the question objects, and I said, like, you know, every object has properties and you can assign values to those properties, and the values can be numbers or strings, and they can also be functions. Well, the math object is no different. It's an object and it has properties. It has a key of random, and in our case, random happens to be a function. Okay? So this is an object just like anything else in JavaScript. The random function that they give us returns a random number between 0 and 1, and it's a decimal number, right? So, oh, pardon me, right? So let's give it a try. What if we made a for loop just for fun here, and we said let I equal 0, and let's repeat while I is less than 100, right? And then I'm going to do I plus equals 1, and I'm going to call my random function. I'm actually not using the parameter n right now. We're going to use that later, but let's call random, okay? So I'll call random like this, and then when I refresh my page, you can see I've got all my random numbers here, right? So we just did it 100 times, and it always did the same thing, okay? Math.random produces a number between 0 and 1. So here's 0.84, 0.25, 0.806, 0.98, 0.09, 0.3, right? It's just a random number. Okay, so how would, and you can't put any parameters here. You can't put like 44 or something, you know, it just doesn't change anything, right? So it actually doesn't take any parameters, right? So this by itself is not super useful, right? It could be useful in some cases, but in our case, it's not going to work because I need a number, you know, like 1, 2, 3, right? Or 0, 1, 2, right? So how can we do that? Well, if we take a number here, and we put, like, let's say we put like 6 here, right? You know, so I take Math.random times 6, like I'm trying to generate some random die rolls, right? If I refresh the page here, now you can see I've got, you know, 0.7, but 1.1, 1.5, 5.5, 3, right? 3.9, 2.6, 1.7. Right, so now if I took that number and I multiplied by 6, I'm really getting like a range of random numbers between 0 and 6, right? Or 0 and a little less than 6, right? 5.7, 5.8. I think, I forget, for some reason I want to say that random would never return the number 1.0, right? But maybe that's possible. I don't know. It probably says in the documentation. Anyway, so how can we work with this? Well, what if instead of the number 6 here, what if we put an n there, right? So n is just our variable. That's a parameter that we're going to pass into random. And, you know, if I passed in 10 here, when I called random, then n would be 10 times math.random, and then we would get a bunch of random numbers between 0 and 10, right? So there's 8.5, 9.9, so that's almost 10, you know, 0.6, that's 1, right? 0.1, if we rounded down, that would be 0, right? So I got kind of 0 to 9 or 10, right? Okay, so that's pretty good. So, you know, this is really good. This would be useful to us if we could get rid of everything after the decimal place. So everything from here over, if we deleted it, this answer would be 0. This answer would be 7. This would be a 1, right? This would be a 7, another 7, and a 4, right? And a 6, right? So how do we do that? Well, you know what? Math also has a few other functions. It has a function called floor. So floor is like rounding down. So whenever you floor a number, like if I take this number here and I put it inside floor, let's actually change this up. Let's do R is going to be our random number. And let's take this thing here and write it like this. So, and then we'll floor R. So maybe that makes it a little more clear what's going on. So we'll say const R is math.random times n. And then we'll take the R. So the R is the number that we're seeing here. And then we'll take that number and we'll floor it. And then we'll console log it. So whenever you floor, we're just dropping everything to the right of the decimal point. Okay? So let's save that, and then we'll create 100 random numbers, right? So here's 7, 1. This says 2 because it generated 2 1s in a row, right? There's 7, 1, 2, 1, 6, 3, 4, 9, 6, right? So that's pretty good. So now I've got 0 to 9, right? So I put in 10 here, and then my random number function generated numbers between 0 and 9. So I'm not seeing any 10s in here, right? 0 to 9. Okay, so that's pretty good. Okay, so now what are we going to do with this? How are we going to use this, right? This is just for testing. We're going to delete that, but we're going to save this thing, right? So what I'd like to do here is instead of console log this, I'd like to return, oops, wait, let me save that, wait. I want to keep this part right here and return it. So I want to return floor R, right? So that's the value that you're seeing here, right? So let's return that, right? So now what do we want to do, right? So we'll keep this, we'll delete this thing in a minute, right? Okay, so what are we going to do, okay? So here I've got this list item, but I want to set order to a random number, okay? But it has to be a random number that's 0 to the number of answers that we have. Okay, 0 to the number of answers. Okay, so that means that essentially if I have 3 answers for one question, then the numbers have to be 0, 2, or 0, 1, and 2, right? Okay, and if I had 4 answers, then I need to have a random number, but the only numbers I want are 0, 1, 2, and 3, right? Okay, so how would we do that? Let's do it in code down here. Okay, so I'm going to add another function. Okay, and let's call this one randomRange. Okay, and so this one will make use of our first random number. So let's say you put a range of numbers in here, right? And you say you want, like, you know, how about X range? So X could be like 0, 1, 2, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an array. So I'll say const array equals a new empty array. And then what I want to do is I want to fill my array with numbers from 0 to x minus 1. Okay, so we'll say for, and we'll say let I equal 0. It really feels like you're programming when you're using just letter names like that. You can maybe name these with longer, more descriptive names if you like, right? So I'm going to say, let's repeat, well, I is less than x, right? So now I'll get from 0 to x minus 1, right? And then we'll say I plus equals 1. And then what I want to do is I want to say array dot push to add an element to the array, and I'll add the number I. Okay, so now I should have an array of numbers. Let's actually console log that, right? Just for fun. So we can get, actually let's just get rid of this for loop just for now. Actually, you know, maybe I'll leave that here and comment it out, because maybe we'll test this function later in this for loop. We'll test it 100 times to make sure it works, right? So let's log the array. So I've got randomRange. If you pass in a function or a number, right, then this function will run. It'll generate an empty array. It'll loop to this count and then push the numbers in here. So, if I call it with x, I should have an array of, x minus 1 numbers in it, and it should count through them, right? So let's call it once. Let's say randomRange, and let's say I have a range of 3, right? So I'll refresh here, and you can see I get 0, 1, 2, right? If I said, random 8, then I get 0 through 7, okay? So that's pretty good, but what I really want to do is I want to see this array, but I want all the numbers jumbled up so they're not in the same order, okay? So how are we going to do that? Okay, so this is like a little more work, but it's kind of fun. We can look at different ways that JavaScript works, and we can look at a different kind of loop. So far I've got my my array here, and what I want to do is I'm going to say let's repeat while, okay? And a while loop is like a for loop, but this loop is going to continue as long as the condition within the parentheses is true. So now note that when you're writing code like this and you're learning to write code, you can create a while loop that will run endlessly. And I've done this like 100 times, and it'll actually kind of lock up the browser for a moment, and then the browser will give you a warning like saying, hey, this script is running forever, and you've just created like an endless loop, and that's okay. Just figure out what your problem is and solve it, right? It won't break anything, but just know that can happen with this kind of loop. This one will always count to the end and stop, unless we made a mistake here. Actually, if you did subtract, then this would never be greater than x, so you would, if you did minus equals, right? So you could create an endless loop here. It's less likely, but with while loops, that kind of happens sometimes. So what are we going to do? Why don't we repeat while there are items in array, and then what we'll do is we'll pick a random item from array and put it in a new array, and then we'll return that array when we're done. Let me go over that again. So here's our goal. We're going to repeat while there are still items, so that's going to be the length of array r is greater than 0, right? So let's repeat while r dot length is greater than 0, okay? So that means if we don't remove an item from array, then this loop will run forever, right? But if every loop, every time we loop through while, every time we run this block, if we remove one item here, then the length will go down by 1, and then sooner or later we'll get to 0 items, and then it'll end, right? Okay? So let's make a new array here. Let's call this one, how about random array equals empty array. And what I want to do is I want to remove an item from the array here, okay, from R, the first array, right? So we'll say random array dot push, right? Actually, maybe let's break this into 2 lines. It might be easier to understand, right? So we'll do const, let's call this random number equals array bracket, and I want to get one of the items out of here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's say random. That's our function up above here, right? And the n for us will be array.length. Okay, so if we say, hey, let's go into array and get a random item equal to, the length minus 1. So that should be a random number. Let me fix my spelling there, right? Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll take that random number and we'll say random array dot push, and we'll push the random number into our random array. Now, so far we haven't removed an item from array, right? So that's going to be a problem, right? This while loop would run forever. So we got to make sure we remove an item. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say array.splice. And when we splice, we say the index that we want to splice from, right? And the how many items we want to remove, right? So this was the index that we wanted to splice from, but we're not saving it. So you know what I think we need to do is we need to save that outside here. So let's do random index equal to this thing. And then we'll use the random index here to get the item at that index, put it in this variable, and then push it into the random array. And then what we'll do is we'll take the random index and we'll splice it. So splice says, where do you want to start in the array? How many items you want to remove? So I want to remove one item, okay? And then at the end here, let's actually return the random array, okay? So let's go over that. Let's go over that one more time. So we're going to start here with our function. You're going to pass in a number x. We're going to make an empty array, fill it with numbers counting from 0 to x minus 1. We're going to create a brand new empty array, and we're going to loop while the first array still has a length greater than 0. And then with each loop, we'll get a random number, which will be an index. Essentially, it will be 0 to 1 less than the length of the original array. And then we'll grab one of the numbers out of the array at that random index. We'll push the random number into the random array, and then we'll splice the original array and remove the item at the random index. So that was the number that we put in here, right? So we'll splice that out so now it doesn't exist. So the next time we run through, we'll grab a different number. And then we'll return our random array. Okay, so this is random range of 8. Let's console log it. Console.log, and then we'll console log the array that we returned right here. So let's refresh and run it. Oh, that's pretty good, right? So it's 1, 4, 7, 6, 5, 3, 0, 2. Yeah, that's all the numbers, right? Let's do it again. Okay, 6, 4, right? So that looks pretty random. Okay, so that was kind of a lot of programming work there, but we've made a couple helper functions to do some work for us, right? And then we can use those up here to set the order. So let's handle that in the next video. So thanks for watching. This one went on a little long, but hopefully that's kind of an interesting look at programming with the while loop and using arrays. Okay.